Welcome everybody to our stakeholder meeting. My name is Justin Miller. I served as Slingshot's founding CEO, and now I serve as its board chair. I'm joined by Jared Barnett, who's Slingshot's current CEO. Recently, Slingshot hit its 5-year anniversary. There's a lot to celebrate and a lot of work to be done. We're excited to give you an update today. There'll be a Q&A at the end of this conversation, and Jared's going to lead us. And I'll turn it over to him. Thanks again for being here.
Right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So kind of do a quick outline of the meeting here today. So we've kind of broken it up into 3 sections. And so after each section, we will pause for some Q&A. The way that the Q&A will work is you can submit questions at any time via the Q&A feature via Zoom. And so that will be the way that you can submit questions. And then when we get to the Q&A session, we'll pull up as many questions as we can and try and answer them as we go. We'll also keep track of all these questions and follow up if we need to, if we didn't have time to get to them today. So I want to make sure that, you know, that we'll try and be responsive there and look forward to engaging that way. So the way the meeting will focus is the first part, we want to focus kind of on the opportunity to revolutionize poverty fighting and our approach to a data movement to do that. The second module will then focus on the evidence of the impact that we've been able to help achieve in the first 5 years. And then the third module will focus on our plans to accelerate this impact over the next 5 years. So I'm excited to start by talking about the opportunity here that's available. And so I'd like everyone to kind of just imagine a scenario here. So Janelle is a 16-year-old girl who lives in South Memphis. Her mother works 2 jobs in order to provide enough resources to pay for rent and food. And because of that, she's always taking the car to work. And so Janelle has to get to school via the bus. Janelle is very talented academically. She has a really strong aptitude towards STEM-related items, and she attends an after-school program. That after-school program serves 300 students at that location. And because they're serving so many students, Janelle only gets access to a personal tutor once a week. She's not able, unfortunately, though, to go to a different after-school program because in addition to her mother having their car, there's also not any public transportation anywhere within 1.5 miles of her house. And so she's limited to what she can do, where she can travel. In addition, the only fresh food Janelle has access to is typically at her school. Because the closest grocery store to her house is several miles away, it's too far to walk and the public transportation doesn't get it there. And her mother, even though she has the resources to buy that food, her 2 jobs make it so that whenever she's not working, the grocery stores are closed. And so this is Janelle's ecosystem and what she lives in. And it's very similar to any natural ecosystem we learned about in biology and in school. And so just like in an ecosystem where you have living organisms, inorganic objects, that all interact together, we think of poverty fighting in the same way. And so just as if one part of a natural ecosystem gets out of whack and you have something that decimates a species of animals, it filters through the entire ecosystem. We believe the same thing happens when it comes to poverty fighting, that in order to effectively alleviate poverty, we have to think about it as an ecosystem of interconnected factors that have to work in some sort of harmony in order to function effectively. In Memphis and in many other communities, we haven't been functioning as an effective ecosystem. One of the ways we know this is that we're one of the most giving cities in the US. On a per capita basis, we give a lot. Relative to comparable size cities, we give nearly double those cities. Yet we haven't seen the change that we want. And so our poverty rates have remained basically the same for the last 50 years. And in fact, in 2018, our poverty rate was higher than it was in 1970. And so we've thought about, through our experience and our research, both lived experience and otherwise, why, right? Why is this happening? And so one of the opportunities we've identified that is missing is an effective poverty fighting feedback loop. And so unlike business, sports, medicine, or other industries that have agreed upon ways of measuring outcomes and effectiveness, we haven't had that when it comes to fighting poverty. And so what that means is that we'll make our philanthropic investments, organizations will implement programs to try and help alleviate poverty, but then we don't know, is it working or not? And so therefore we're left guessing when it comes to trying to enhance those programs and make changes. And we're stuck using metrics that don't really answer the question of, is it working? We're stuck with anecdotes or experiences that we hope is applicable. And therefore we lack that effectiveness that we all want. And so that's the opportunity that we're really excited about as Slingshot Memphis to address and to help revolutionize is how do we fix this feedback loop to help our poverty fighting ecosystem function more effectively in our work. And so I look forward to talking about how now Slingshot is striving to do that. So Slingshot Memphis is a poverty fighting center of influence that's igniting a movement to revolutionize the way we fight poverty. We're doing that because we want all Memphians, regardless of their social or economic circumstances, to have equitable opportunities for personal and economic success. At the end of the day, this is about people, and it's about helping create opportunities for people to achieve their potential and to have access to a quality of life that is fulfilling and rewarding. The way we're doing that is through three primary functions. So we call these impact studies, opportunities for greater impact, and our accelerate impact fund. So our impact studies is where we work alongside poverty fighting organizations and we study their effectiveness. We provide that consistent and standardized way of understanding what's working and what's not. Our opportunities for greater impact identify opportunities to enhance the outcomes that organizations produce. So how can they produce better poverty fighting outcomes, more poverty fighting outcomes, different poverty fighting outcomes that would help transform the lives of the people they work with. And then third, we raise funds from the community and we invest 100% of those funds to help amplify poverty fighting organizations that have the evidence of having effective programs and services. And so I'll spend a few minutes here going into a little bit more detail of these, just trying as we go forward. So our methodology is based on 4 dimensions that we've identified as being helpful in understanding the effectiveness of the organization. These are benefit cost ratio, systems level change, use of best practices, and measurement infrastructure. We believe each of these collectively provide a different sort of insight to help us understand in as comprehensive way as possible the effectiveness of this organization. Benefit cost ratio is a quantitative measure that allows us to monetize the benefits that an organization creates and from a poverty fighting perspective, and compare that to the cost. And this will help enhance the allocation of resources by knowing what's producing the greatest poverty fighting return on investment. Systems level change addresses the magnitude of an organization's poverty fighting impact in the community beyond its programming. This is typically done through partnerships or policy changes, and this work helps us validate which of those might be most impactful for an organization to pursue. Use of best practices focuses on how that organization uses evidence-based, research-verified practices for its programs and its staff performance management. And this helps improve the magnitude of poverty fighting outcomes, because if you're using something that's proven to work, the likelihood of it producing the outcomes that we want is much higher. And finally, measurement infrastructure focuses on how an organization collects, analyzes, and ultimately uses data to improve their decision-making, which helps create the foundation for an evidence-based continuous improvement process. Our methodology helps us measure poverty fighting effectiveness over time. It's something we're really excited about. And so, the graphic here on our left is kind of at a point in time we can say, based on the evidence that we've collected for this organization, based on the research that exists, and based on our rubric of understanding what is effective and not, we're able to give anyone, the organization, the community, an understanding of where is that organization's effectiveness at each of these 4 dimensions that we assess. In addition, we also are able to share a perspective around the trajectory since the previous impact study. So for instance, in this case, for this organization, you could say this organization has a benefit cost ratio of at least strong, but they've actually regressed a bit since the last time we studied this organization, which we do annually. So for any organization we work with, we do an annual impact study for them so that we can track these changes over time, which on the right shows what we're able to do when we work with organizations for multiple years, is we're able to start to see trends and ask the right questions. That's what I'm really excited about this. And so for instance, in this case, the question I'd ask is, why is that use of best practices trending so positively? What's that organization been doing, right? If I'm looking at measurement infrastructure, I'd want to ask, well, why has it stagnated? Why haven't seen improvement there? And so what we're excited about is providing this information so that we can ask those questions and empower you, the nonprofits, philanthropists, foundations, with the information needed to understand better and to ask the questions that will lead to actionable change. The next piece of, again, our work is opportunities for greater impact. And so for this, the nice thing about our methodology is that we break each of those 4 dimensions down into numerous subdimensions. We gather evidence against each of those subdimensions, and we compare that to a rubric we've developed to help us understand their effectiveness for that subdimension. It's therefore really easy to identify where is an organization's relative strengths and where is an organization's relative opportunities. And using that methodology, we're then able to provide an organization at the end of each impact study a prioritized set of opportunities that would improve their poverty fighting effectiveness. And then we also provide actionable explanations for each, because our goal is that they take action on this and do something with it to get better, not just give them something to run away. And so it's really important for us as a poverty fighting center of influence that we get to help influence and empower these organizations to take action on these opportunities to be enhance their effectiveness. The last piece then is that with our Accelerate Impact Fund, we invest those funds based on the organization's poverty fighting effectiveness. So this chart on the left shows that we invest exponentially more in organizations that are more effective and then much less in organizations that are less effective. What we think this does is it cuts through a lot of the bias, the uncertainty, and we're able to say very clearly, if it's effective, we want to support that and make sure it has the resources to do that work. If it's not effective or less effective, how do we help it become more effective so we can then fund it and support that going forward? So it allows us to ensure that the resources that we have are being spent in a way that produces the greatest poverty fighting return. And our criteria to do that are very simple. So 1, what's the current effectiveness of the organization based on our impact study that we perform? 2, what's been the trajectory of their effectiveness? Has it been improving or regressing? And so we invest more in organizations that are improving and less in organizations that are regressing. And then finally, for the first 3 years we work with organizations, we'll invest a fixed amount to help support them through this process and this journey and taking action on the things that we discover through the impact study together. One of the things I'm excited about is, in addition to this methodology and approach, we've built an infrastructure to really help make sure we can do this effectively and with a very high quality standard that we try and hold ourselves to. So the team that we've been able to assemble to this date is really inspiring for me. We've taken an approach where we're trying to put together pieces of a puzzle. So we all bring different skills and experiences to this work. We have several people who have an academic experience. So we have 2 PhDs and 1 who's currently working on her PhD. We have people with for-profit experience. And so we have 2 people who worked at the consulting firm McKinsey & Company that are here at Slingshot. We have people who have worked at the World Bank. We have several people who have worked in nonprofits directly implementing their programs. And we also have team members who have lived experience in poverty, who have this wealth of perspectives that we can now bring and contribute to this work. In addition to the team, we've really invested in our processes and approaches to make sure that we can do this well. So I've highlighted a few of those things here that I just wanted to cover quickly. The first is we have an impact profile, which is a standardized repository of all the analysis, evidence, research necessary to understand an organization's poverty fighting effectiveness. Second, we have systemic processes we put together so that we're going to do this consistently with every organization that we get to work with. We've developed a suite of tools to help ensure that we do this, again, consistently and at a high quality. So we have a benefit cost ratio tool that we use every time we do that analysis. We have rubrics that we use to make our processes objective and try and remove as much bias from our work so that we can be objective in how we do that. And we've invested in our technology, whether that's through our data management system or project management tools, to try and make sure that we can do this work with the quality that we think is necessary because of what we're trying to do, which is help improve people's lives. And then we've also are excited about the pool of poverty fighting resources that have been emerging from this work. So we have a research repository of over 425 articles that help us understand what's effective and not when it comes to poverty fighting. We have a data lake across the 30 poverty fighting organizations we've worked with of information that helps us understand what they're doing that's effective, what they're doing that isn't as effective as they want. And we can start to aggregate that across these organizations. And we're starting to be able to understand correlations and interrelations between work. And so in this particular chart on the right, the rows are the benefit cost ratio effectiveness, and the columns are their use of best practices effectiveness. And an interesting insight here is that none of the organizations that we've worked with that have had a very strong benefit cost ratio have had anything but at least strong or very strong use of best practices. And so our sample size is still small. And as we grow, we'll get more and more confident in these types of analyses, but we're starting to be able to see some of these connections that we think are really exciting as we think about how do we understand what's working and what's not. All right, so we'll pause here for the first Q&A. And hope we've been able to share a little bit around, the opportunity that we have to, for enhancing poverty fighting, as well as how Slingshot is trying to approach that. So the first question here is kind of what makes Slingshot unique. Justin, I'll start if you want to answer the first part. I'm happy to add something as well, but why don't you share kind of your thoughts around what makes us unique?
Yeah, well, my knee-jerk response to that great question is there's a lot of roadmaps, a lot of blueprints. There have been in Memphis. I'm a native Memphian, so born and raised. But an excellent roadmap or a blueprint is only as good as the people that do it and are behind it and are leading it. And so the team that you mentioned earlier, many of our core founding investors, our board directors, do this with a tremendous amount of rigor, and they do it with a tremendous amount of grace. And I think that's what makes us pretty unique.
So thanks. I'd add to that I think, one of the other things I think that makes us unique is that we're really trying to tackle this space in a way that hasn't been tackled before. There's a lot of people who are trying to invest wisely in things, but this creating a standardized way of understanding what's working and what's not that can be repeated across a variety of poverty fighting organizations, whether it's an early childhood program or an after school program or a workforce development program. It's applicable across all of that. And in a way, it's kind of like creating something like the financial statements for business, but we're doing that when it comes to poverty fighting. Great question here. And so Ed's asked, how are the tools available for people and organizations to access? And so right now on our website, we currently have our first batch of what we call our impact profile summaries on the organizations that we work with. That information is our most recent understanding of that organization's effectiveness based on our methodology. In addition, we've also we've just launched a brand new website as of last week, where we have information about our methodology on our website too, in a way that we can hopefully help empower you and access this information. In addition, I'll speak about this a little bit later. We have a lot more plans for how to make our website a greater tool to help. And so our hope is that over time here, we'll be able to make our website something where you can find anything that will help, that you're seeking to try and help alleviate poverty and do that as effectively as possible.
Okay, I just want to add, Ed, I've known Ed for a long time, and he's a great example of a thought partner that Slingshot has had for a long time, and he has helped make us better. And as Jared and the team will say on regular occasion, we don't have all the answers. This is not a silver bullet. We're evolving. We're making this way more dynamic and useful as we learn. And so we welcome your feedback. And Ed, I appreciate your feedback through the years and look forward to more of it.
Great. So next question is, can any nonprofit in Memphis apply to be a part of this? And so I think, there's a few criteria we put in place here, but they're pretty broad because, again, we think of poverty fighting as an ecosystem perspective. And so to us, if an organization is focused on trying to alleviate poverty, which we typically measure as either an improvement in income or an improvement in health, that would be an organization that we would be interested in talking to work with. We want to make sure that they're prepared to work with us, that they're excited. We've learned that there has to be a mutual preparedness to work together. It does take time to go through and do impact studies. And so the organization needs to have some capacity to go through and do that. The first year we work with an organization, it typically takes 3 to 4 months with typically weekly or every other week meetings to work through this together and really try and understand it in a way that is robust enough that we feel confident reaching conclusions. But we're excited to work with a variety of organizations. And so we're starting to work with a transportation organization here in Q1 of next year. We work with after school programs, prenatal care, workforce development, vocational school. There's a variety of things. And again, if an organization helps people who would be considered, experiencing poverty, and if they do something to help improve their income or their health, that's within kind of the wheelhouse of the types of organizations we'd be interested in exploring opportunities with. Yeah, so a great question here. Someone asked we've built some stuff already, what are still the gaps that we want to kind of continue to plug to build our work. I'm going to actually pause on that one because I think we're going to address some of that in our last session. And so with your permission, I'll address that in the third module. And if I haven't done it well, please put in another Q&A question and we'll get back to it. Really good question here. So question here around why do we think benefit cost ratios for many organizations are not very strong? And so I think there's a lot of factors that can go into this. There is some instances where there's not sufficient data to really understand. And so sometimes that happens where we'll work with an organization where either there's insufficient data that they've collected or there's insufficient research that limits our ability to do that. So that is kind of those two things are kind of foundational things that we need. I think the next piece around that is that there's also differences in what organizations do. So for instance, an organization that's helping someone for a very acute point in time, there's only so much benefit they can provide that person because it's for a limited period of time. Whereas other organizations provide benefits that accrue throughout the lifetime or the career for that individual. And so just inherently, those organizations are only going to have a potential based on what they're doing. A great analogy I like to use is, in the business world, right? Different types of organizations or sectors have different financial performance. So a technology company is going to have very different financials than a manufacturing company that's, producing, toilet paper. And so you need both, right? We definitely don't want the toilet paper manufacturer to go away, but their financials may not be as attractive as a technology company that has very limited fixed costs and other opportunities. And so that's one piece. The final piece I'll say here too is just a lack of understanding. I think a lot of organizations haven't understood what they're doing that is most effective. And therefore they're trying to do all these things that are presented to them in terms of the needs of the people that they're trying to support. And they don't always have the understanding of what is most effective. And we'll speak to that a little bit here later around how the benefit cost ratio work we've been able to do has helped organizations transition have higher benefit cost ratios.
Jared, if I might add, I also think there's been a void in funding for organizations to have the capacity and the tools to do a lot of the things that Jared just mentioned. And so as he alluded to earlier, Slingshot, yes, we do raise capital, and 100% of the capital we raise in the Accelerate Impact Fund does go into our organizations based on performance and other metrics. But we also do this work on behalf of these amazing organizations free of charge. So we raise capital. You might want to say a little bit about that structure. I think you might hit on that later.
No, it's a great point, Justin. So we're a nonprofit ourselves as Slingshot. And through the generous contributions of our principal investors, we're able to cover all of our costs through their support. Therefore, everything that people contribute to our Accelerate Impact Fund, we're able to give 100% of that to the organizations we work with. And we're also able to conduct our impact studies at no cost to these nonprofits. And so, it's a great way for us to be able to remain objective and be able to really empower these organizations because we have the support of these principal investors who have really enabled us to build everything we've built over this first 5 years. Great. Well, we're excited to move on then to kind of the next section, which is around kind of some of the evidence of the impact that we've been able to see here in these first 5 years in this movement to revolutionize poverty fighting. So in these first 5 years, we've been able to work with 30 poverty fighting organizations through this year. And we just added 6 more organizations that we'll start working with in early 2022. So we're up to 36. With those organizations, we've been able to complete 60 impact studies. And again, we conduct an impact study on an organization each year. And so the 4 organizations we worked with in 2017, each year thereafter, we've conducted impact studies with those organizations to update our understanding of their effectiveness so that it's always current and we can share that on an annual basis. We also have 13 in progress. So shortly after the end of this year, we'll have completed 73 impact studies in total. One of the things that I'm personally really excited about is how strongly the poverty fighting organizations we work with are embracing these new insights. And so we've shared here quotes from several of the organizations that we work with about how this work how they've embraced this work. And so, one of my favorites here is Katrin with JIF. So, she's mentioned that our work has helped them capture and measure additional things. It's helped them be much more data-driven in how they make decisions. And they've been able to also evaluate the curriculums they're using so that they can make sure they're using the most evidence-based practices. JIF focuses on working with youth who've been involved in the juvenile justice system and helps try and prevent and exposure to being incarcerated as well as any kind of recidivism. And so they're working with a very vulnerable population that has a lot of risks. They're typically in environments that are not as supportive as you would hope for a youth to be in. And JIF has done a great job now of being able to use a lot of this data that they have and the research that exists to help enhance what they're doing and the effectiveness of it. Another one here to call out is Lifeline to Success. And so, Lifeline was able to take our impact study and engage their board in a way that allowed their board to be much more focused in their support. And so Vanessa, who is their director of operations and is actually currently their interim executive director, has been able to take this, get committees on their board focused on the different opportunities for greater impact that we've been able to help identify, and now has the board working on these in a way that has allowed them to engage in a way she says she's never been able to in the past. And so, again, 2 examples of many here, but just for me, what's exciting is that with this information, organizations are excited about it and doing things with it because they understand how it helps them achieve what their ultimate goal is, which is helping the people that they get the opportunity to work with. On top of that, I'm really excited because not only are organizations embracing this, but we're also seeing measurable improvements as they do this. So give us 1 second here and we'll get back to that. We had our technology freeze up on us real quick. There we go. Up to here real quick. Here we go. Oh, sorry about that. Great. So one of the nice things that our methodology allows us to do is we can actually measure changes, right? And so for the organizations that we worked with in 2019, 90% of those organizations demonstrated measurable improvements in our impact studies in 2020 and 2021. And so for us, it's exciting to see that not only are they embracing this and saying, hey, we really like this, it's helpful, we're actually seeing it translate to changes in their effectiveness. And so this shows, we have those 4 dimensions in our poverty fighting, in our impact study. And so you're able to see that across the number of those dimensions, we're able to see some that have improved in all of those aspects, and others who've improved in 1, 2, or 3 of those aspects. And then ultimately what we care about is it improving the quality of people's lives or enhancing poverty fighting outcomes. And so we've shared here a few examples of how our work has helped organizations and therefore then benefited the participants of those organizations. And so I'll focus on 2 of those here. Purdue Center of Hope we started working with back in 2017. They're one of the first organizations we worked with. And doing our benefit cost analysis, we helped Purdue Center of Hope realize that the benefits, the largest benefits that they were providing were for the youth who resided with their mothers at the Purdue Center. This is in part because those youth were no longer having to go to the foster care system, but they could remain with their mothers at Purdue Center of Hope, which is the largest women and children shelter here in the city. And so their programming is not just a 1 or 2 night shelter, but it can be up to 24 months to help these mothers and their children get in a strong foundation before they then transition into more permanent housing. And so as a result of our work together and understanding that the youth were really the ones who Purdue Center was disproportionately helping, they then expanded their capacity for families, and they offered more beds and more space so they could accommodate more families. In addition, they also enhanced their youth programming and hired staff to provide academic support and counseling to the youth that reside with them. And so the benefits that this is now provided for the people that they serve is that they're able to accommodate more youth. So more youth now are getting the chance to experience these benefits and avoid being placed in the foster care system. And those benefits have been enhanced with the additional programming that Purdue Center's had. So those youth see improved academic outcomes, social and emotional learning outcomes, as well as mental health outcomes as a result of Purdue Center's focus now on these areas that they're disproportionately able to provide value here in our poverty fighting ecosystem. Another opportunity here, or example here that I really like is Memphis Inner City Rugby. And so Memphis Inner City Rugby was started as an after-school rugby program. You know, the couple teachers here in the city said, hey, we like rugby, let's create a program here in the city. In the course of our opportunity to work with them, we identified that the largest benefits they provided were not from rugby, but actually from the college pathways and wraparound support they provided these youth here in Memphis to help them get to college and then persist in college. And so as a result of that, Memphis Inner City Rugby increased their efforts on creating pathways between their rugby program here in Memphis and college rugby programs across the United States. They've placed students who have rugby scholarships at University of Memphis, Queens College. They've even had a student get a scholarship to play rugby at Dartmouth up in New Hampshire. In addition, Memphis Inner City Rugby also enhanced the financial aid support they provide, both in counseling and supporting their student athletes, but also in the financial scholarships they themselves provided. And they expanded their alumni support so that they could work with more of their alumni as they enter college and provide this wraparound programming for them. And so the result now is that Memphis Inner City Rugby student athletes are receiving more college scholarships, they're receiving greater amounts of financial aid, and they're experiencing greater post-secondary school enrollment and persistence. What's neat here is that between 2019 and 2020, Memphis Inner City Rugby increased their poverty fighting benefits by 60%. And that's not because they work with 60% more people. It's because they adjusted their programming to provide the highest value programming to their student athletes and therefore create that disproportionate benefit for them. Finally, then kind of transitioning to our Accelerated Impact Fund. So since inception, Slingshot's been able to raise through the community over $5.7 million. And again, 100% of that money goes to support the organizations that we work with. In 2020, the $2 million that we were able to raise and invest produced an estimated $3.8 million in poverty fighting benefits. We can estimate that because we've calculated benefit cost ratios for each of these organizations. So we know what type of benefits that organization should be able to create with the money we give them. And because we give disproportionately to the most effective organizations that we work with, we're able to produce a return like this, which is 90% poverty fighting return on investment. And so these are some of the things that we're excited about that we feel are the evidence around how this movement is working and how it's helping transform our effectiveness when it comes to poverty fighting here in Memphis. We'll transition now to the next set of Q&A here and welcome questions and look forward to answering these. Great. So the first question here is, how does Slingshot measure its own success? And so, in this one, I think it's around what do we achieve right now at the organizations we're supporting. And if we're seeing those organizations incorporate this information, and improve their poverty fighting effectiveness, that for us is a way for us measuring the success of what we're doing. At some point, we'll reach sufficient scale where we hope to see that in a more macro level way. But right now, because we're working with 30 organizations, we measure that on an individual basis. Justin, what else would you add there?
Yeah, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about our partnership with MDRC and what that looks like. And then secondly, I would add that there is a growing contingency of funders, whether it's a foundation or a faith community or an individual family office, who are using our metrics to make their own decisions, which we welcome too. And so that's another indicator of how we measure our own success and helping them get better at what they do.
Thanks, Justin. And in terms of MDRC, so MDRC is a preeminent organization in the US nationally here that is focused on high quality research. And so they conduct research on all sorts of things that help inform policy, and their goal is to do that in an evidence-based way. We partnered with MDRC starting back in early 2020, and they actually assessed us in 2020. They participated in a couple of our impact studies, and at the conclusion of that, they shared with us their observations of our strengths of our impact study process and our opportunities to make that more effective. And so in 2021, we've been incorporating that feedback to try and make our work better. And we're about to participate or about to expand this into kind of phase 2 of our partnership with MDRC, where we're going to further expand our work together and our ability to hopefully help influence Memphis's poverty fighting ecosystem by providing even further information through their rigorous randomized control trials and other studies that they do. Sorry here, question's a little long, so I want to make sure I capture all of it. Okay, great question. So question was around, currently we have a 1.9 times poverty fighting return on investment and through our Accelerated Impact Fund. The question is, what do we think that might be able to grow to? I'll be honest, I don't have a great perspective on what that might be able to grow to, because it'll really depend upon the organizations we work with. And so our aspiration is not just to work with the perceived best organizations. That we don't feel like that is always a helpful way. We want to work with a variety of organizations, whether they're currently effective or less effective, so that they have that information and can do something with it. Now, our investments will always be tied to how effective that organization is. And so we anticipate that as we help organizations move on that spectrum, that we'll be able to increase that poverty fighting return on investment over time. But I couldn't tell you at this point if we think it's a 5 times return on investment or a 2.5 times return on investment that we might get to. So the next question is, in what ways do we seek input from the organizations we work with? And so the first part is that we do this throughout the impact study process. And so as part of this, we meet with an organization, we gather evidence from them, we go back and synthesize that, and then we come back to them and give them an opportunity in our evidence reviews to validate that the evidence we've collected is an accurate representation of them. And then with that, we're able to then go and do our analysis and reach our conclusions, but we've ensured that it's based on information that evidence that they agree is accurate. In addition, at the end of each impact study, we ask questions of that organization to help us understand what worked well, what could we do better? And then annually, we ask for feedback from our poverty fighting organizations that we work with as well to help us understand more impact related items around how did our work help them be more or less effective? What were ways that they used it, so that we can understand that and try and make sure that our work is helping them in the ways that they would find most valuable and the ways that they are seeing the need that our work can be used towards.
Jared, I'd also like to tether that question to an earlier question around how we measure our success. The first year, 2016, really 2017, we were really asking a lot of 4 organizations to take a chance on working alongside us. Each one of those 4 organizations is still working alongside us, and it's going great. Things have changed a little bit since then. We've grown and we have a lot more capacity. And many of the organizations that reach out to Slingshot that seek partnership opportunities do so because another friend at another nonprofit said you ought to work with Slingshot, which is another more informal way that we gauge is what we're doing worthwhile and useful for the community.
Thanks, Justin. All right, we'll now kind of proceed to module 3 here, which is kind of looking forward, which for me is really exciting here. And so, I think our vision here at Slingshot is to become a hub of insights that empowers the poverty fighting ecosystem, whether it's a nonprofit, a corporation, a faith-based community, an individual philanthropist. Our goal is to have information that we can share that will help all of those parts of the ecosystem more effectively achieve their aspirations. And so we think it's important for everyone to have their passions. I think that's an important part of this work. And we want to supplement those passions with the information, the tools, and the resources to achieve the outcomes that passion desires to achieve. So I'll spend a few minutes now talking about some of the more strategic initiatives that we're really excited about that we think are going to accelerate the impact of this movement. And so the first of those is that we're going to spend over this next 3 to 5 years, we're going to make sure we incorporate lived experiences into our methodology. Currently, we focus on the program design and how it was intended to be implemented. We then focus on how effectively are those programs implemented and consistently being done. And so our next piece here is to actually speak with and incorporate the perspectives of those who are experiencing poverty. They know it better than any of us. Right? They understand the challenges. They're also able to share, hey, this nonprofit intended for this program to do something. Was that actually their experience? And so we're really excited to explore this piece and making sure that the voice of those who are experiencing poverty are also part of the solution. And that important evidence and data is included in our methodology. And so that'll be one of those initiatives that we're excited to embrace here these next couple of years. The next one is to scale. And so, in the next several years, we're hoping to grow to 75 to 100 poverty fighting organizations that we get to work with. That will enable us to complete, over 250 impact studies since our inception. With that scale, what it does is it enables us to build this pool of data, this data warehouse that will allow us to do all sorts of things that can't be done otherwise. A really good analogy I like to use is that similar to Google, which their search engine didn't produce any money by itself, but the data that it gathered was really valuable. Or an Amazon or a Facebook was the same thing, right? These technology companies are building data sets that then create the value of those data sets. That's what our aspiration here is to do, is as we scale, we want to scale with purpose, we want to maintain the quality of how we do our work. And as we do that, we'll have this wealth of data that we can start to do all sorts of incredible analyses to understand things that we just wouldn't be able to understand otherwise. So another piece is getting back to the ecosystem, right? We mapped out ecosystems in the natural environment. Right? We know what are the predators, what are the herbivores, what are the organisms, inorganic and organic. We map all that out. We know that from a biological standpoint. We've yet to find a really good way of doing that with the poverty fighting ecosystem. And so one of Slingshot's goals is to map out the poverty fighting ecosystem so we can take this nebulous concept of poverty and bring some structure to it so we can understand these pieces that interact with each other. Once we do that, we'll be able to do all sorts of analysis around it. We'll be able to understand things like what's the demand for these needs here in the city across these different parts of the poverty fighting ecosystem. How does that compare to the nonprofits that are providing services there? Do we have too many services or too few services for the needs here in the city? We'll be able to visualize things geospatially and otherwise to understand where might there be geographic gaps in the city between where needs are and where organizations are located. We'll also be able to understand the social challenges that contribute to each of these parts of the ecosystem, so that we can understand what are we actually trying to address, right? We can get rid of some of that nebulous understanding and break it down into something that becomes actionable, which is at the end of the day, what we all need is that information to go and do something in a way that will, again, change the effectiveness of poverty fighting. With that ecosystem, we'll also then be able to expand the insights that we currently provide for individual poverty fighting organizations and be able to aggregate those for entire sectors of the poverty fighting organization. So in this case, we can take one organization here or one sector of the poverty fighting ecosystem, and we can start to say, hey, what are the benefit cost ratios for that part of the ecosystem? What does good look like for that part of the ecosystem relative to what other services are being done? And so by being able to aggregate those insights, we're now able to empower organizations that we don't work with and that aren't here in Memphis with information that will help them be more effective and better understand their performance and their effectiveness relative to other organizations that are trying to do similar things. Great. So we're also excited because we're going to be able to transform our website into, again, a hub of poverty fighting resources. We want our website, which we alluded to here a little earlier in response to Ed's comment, to be a place that you can come to and find something that will help you when it comes to alleviating poverty more effectively. So that could include, information about the performance of individual poverty fighting organizations, right? What has been their trend across the dimensions that we study in our impact studies, right? Providing curated research so that you don't have to go spend hours searching through databases and other academic resources trying to understand what's proven to work. We want to make that available since we're already doing that work publicly, so you can find the research that's most appropriate, that shares what's most effective for what you're interested in. We'll be able to provide analysis around the ecosystem, right, and landscapes around that to understand, what are the poverty fighting organizations in the city that are addressing these needs? Where are they located, right? And what's their capacity relative to the need? And then be able to provide, benchmarks and trends that will help us ask the right questions, right? So if I'm looking at this particular chart that has, example benefit cost ratios, which range from 0 to 2.5 in this particular scenario, I'd want to ask, why does organization A only have a benefit cost ratio a little above 0.5? When clearly every other organization that we've been able, in this group of organizations is well above 1, right? That asks the questions. You can then go in and do that and understand that. And so our goal is again to have these resources available on our website over the next 3 to 5 years to help empower you and others in the ecosystem to be more effective. So one of the things that we've definitely learned over the first 5 years is that we can't do this by ourselves. Slingshot's not gonna, solve poverty by itself. Slingshot's not gonna be able to do these things on our own. The way this works and the way it's worked in other movements is that we have to galvanize all of us towards embracing this approach. And so we need you to participate in this movement. And currently there's many ways you can do that. So the first, use our work in your poverty fighting efforts. Please, we do this not because we want to create a pretty report or, do something that just helps that nonprofit we get to work with. We want to do it to help you with what you're excited about and the ways that we're able to provide that information. And so we, again, that information is on our website. We ask that, you use it and embrace it in your work to help, you in the ways that you want to alleviate poverty. Second, encourage others to adopt our approach and to use our work. Third, invite other poverty fighting organizations to consider working with us so that we can build that data set and that knowledge of understanding of what works here in Memphis. You can also contribute on our social media platforms. So we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Make comments, share it with others, ask us questions, right? We want this to be an interactive tool that we can engage on poverty fighting topics that we're interested and concerned about and help provide those information and resources. And then finally, you can invest in our Accelerate Impact Fund. Again, this is the fund that we raise in the community. 100% of those funds are invested in the organizations that we work alongside based on their poverty fighting effectiveness. This is what produced the 1.9 times return on poverty fighting benefits here that we shared in our 2020. And currently right now, we actually are doing a matching campaign. And so Linda and Frank Smith and Snow and Henry Morgan have kindly and generously offered to match new investments in Slingshot, or if you've already invested in Slingshot, increased investments in Slingshot, and they've allocated $400,000 in matching dollars for that. And so we want to use that to help amplify this work and help, again, amplify the work of the poverty fighting organizations we work with that has the evidence of being effective. So that concludes kind of our stakeholder meeting today. really appreciate the time here. We now have time for some final Q&A between now and the top of the hour, and so we'll open it up for Q&A. Great. So Justin, do you want to start with this one? I know you've spent several years on this, and then I can jump in on some of the things we're doing currently.
Yeah, bear with me. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. What's your... Yeah, so I think we have both, well, the question is, what's your own involvement in influencing funders like foundations in the city to embrace your approach? I would say it's a symbiotic relationship, right? So we had, from day one, we've had several of our city's bigger funders support this work and seed this work. All of those funders are still with Slingshot 5 years later, which is another way that we measure our success. And so we are also learning from many of the city's biggest funders as they are learning from the work that we're doing. Many of the funders, I'll say, have made it a prerequisite to fund an organization. That organization will need to have a Slingshot impact assessment, or at least be in the queue to work with Slingshot, which is really great. Another way that we have, I think, made a lot of progress is we have, Jared mentioned a minute ago about asking the right questions. That's really important, right? To anything worthwhile, to have a healthy sense of curiosity that is evidence-based. And so we have worked with many of our cities' more prominent funders, if you will, to help them rethink the questions that they're asking of somebody that they might be considering giving money to. And so we've helped 2 or 3 organizations that come to mind revamp their application process, which has been very helpful.
Yeah. And we're continuing to do that. And so, part of my previous experience in consulting at McKinsey & Company was, providing consulting projects, advice, feedback here. And so we're continuing to do that today. So we're currently working with 2 organizations here in the city as we speak right now, around ways that they're thinking about how do they translate their desires to the outcomes they want to see, and helping them think through the information that they need to understand to do that, how they can help the organizations they're working with also understand that information so it trickles back to them. And so it's been a great process, and I think symbiotic's been a really good word that Justin used. That our goal is to try and help empower them and also to learn from them, right? So there's nobody in the city that knows more about the challenges that nonprofits face from a funding perspective and how that than the foundations here in the city that receive grant applications throughout the year. And so we're learning from them around what are some of the foundation's pain points and trying to figure out which organizations they want to invest in or how to determine that, as well as some of the pain points that's shared from the nonprofits that submit their grant applications. So the next question here is, are you seeing poverty fighting organizations use our work, so our reports and our metrics, as a way to raise funds? And so the answer to that is absolutely. Justin, I'll let you maybe share a few examples I know that you've been involved in, and I can share a few more recently here.
Yeah, well, I can think of a lot of examples, but one that comes to mind is Agape. David Jordan is the executive director of Agape. He's been there for a long time. And I believe it might have been 2 or 3 years ago, they were back and forth with the state, had the possibility of receiving a meaningful injection of capital, public dollars. And the day after Slingshot completed and presented Agape's impact study to David and his team and their board, David relayed that information directly to the state. David, I think, will tell you that put them in a position to receive many dollars that they might not have received otherwise. And there's many other examples.
Yeah. And so I think, we see it both in sense of, just sharing our reports with that, but we also provide thought partnership for organizations. And so there's one organization that is doing a capital campaign that we worked with. And as part of that capital campaign, we help them estimate the poverty fighting benefits that expansion would provide. And what that allowed them to do is it would say, hey, in addition to saying this expansion helps us work with X many more people across these areas, we were able to help them monetize or quantify the benefits that that would provide. What that allows them to do now is communicate their capital campaign and a return on investment perspective. And so they're now able to say that we think that the annual benefits that this will create are X hundred thousands of dollars. Therefore, there's a payback period of this many years for this capital campaign. And so it allows us to bring some of the best practices of finance into how we think about our philanthropy. And so we do that both in, we've seen it with using our reports as they are, but also in the thought partnership, we're able to think about how do they position what they're doing from a capital campaign or a fundraising perspective in a way that demonstrates the real benefits it's creating, which at the end of the day is those outcomes for people who are experiencing poverty. So a great question here from Bill Ferguson. So the answer is, will this update be available later? And the answer is yes. So our intent is that we'll make this presentation available to you, and then we've recorded this this meeting as well, and we'll make this available here in the future, either on social media or on our website, so that others, you can share it with others, and again, can use it to help others understand what we're doing and how they can participate in this, and again, be a part of this movement to revolutionize poverty fighting by filling that gap in the feedback loop with the information we need to do it as effectively as possible. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We know there's plenty of other things you could have done on a December Thursday afternoon during lunch. We appreciate you. We appreciate you joining us and being a part of this movement here, and are really excited to continue to grow this and build this. Justin mentioned this earlier. Feedback is a core part of what we do. It's really important to us. If there's anything that you've seen that you have suggestions or feedback on, please share them with us. If you put any comments in the comments, we'll capture that. Otherwise, please feel free to send an email to disrupt@slingshotmemphis.org, and we would gladly incorporate that look at that feedback. We're always looking for it. And again, we ask you please participate in this movement in the ways that you're able to, whether that's financially or in using our resources or using your influence to encourage others to embrace this approach.
Thank you again. We'll talk soon.